When it comes to Ukraine and Russia, we have heard quite a bit of rhetoric on what it would take to end the war. Whether you back Trump, Ukraine, Russia, NATO, whatever, there really are only about 5 outcomes. And before we get to that, to discuss the end of this war, we must first understand its current state. And with that in mind, let's begin with a brief overview of the battlefield where the conflict remains as intense as ever. Russia continues its offensive across multiple fronts, deploying an unrelenting flow of troops and equipment against Ukrainian defenses. It's critical to note that this is currently not a stalemate, though. After failing to capture Kyiv early in the war, Russia shifted to a strategy of attrition, which is actually the same strategy that Ukraine switched to. They both aim to exhaust each other's ability to fight, and especially Russia when it comes to Ukraine's ability to defend its territory along the extensive front lines that have been created. Now, despite enduring setbacks from the loss of Black Sea ships to failed incursions, Russia has adhered to its plan, which now appears to be slowly yielding results. Ukraine, though fiercely resisting, faces significant manpower shortages and overstretched forces, particularly in the southern Donetsk region, where Russia gained ground over the summer and autumn. Now, although Russia's advances came at a steep cost, Moscow's strategy relies on depleting Ukraine's capacity to continue fighting faster than it depletes its own. So, given the slow but steady advances Russia seems to be making, they likely believe victory is within reach, even if outside observers see they are actually a long way off. But this raises a crucial question. Why should Russia stop? Any peace plan that doesn't address this question is honestly unlikely to succeed. So, to explore the possible outcomes, let's consider several scenarios built upon the realities of what's going on the ground. Now, the first scenario is a peace with a strong, secure Ukraine. Now, this outcome is one of Kyiv's preferred solutions. It's centered on solid deterrence to prevent future Russian aggression. While NATO membership would provide the strongest guarantee, resistance from key member states may necessitate alternate arrangements, such as bilateral security agreements or European troop deployments, which Germany has alluded to just today. To support Ukraine's recovery, the West would need to sustain military and financial aid. However, this scenario hinges on a critical question. Why exactly would Russia agree to it when they are slowly chipping away at Ukraine? Now, scenario number 2 is a ceasefire without a secure Ukraine. In this scenario, hostilities pause, but there is no robust deterrent against future Russian aggression. A fragile ceasefire along current lines could allow Russia to rebuild its military strength, while Ukraine faces internal challenges, including a divided political landscape and economic dependence on Western aid. This could leave Ukraine vulnerable to renewed Russian aggression, mirroring the flaws of previous ceasefire agreements like the Minsk Accords. Now, scenario 3 is a desperate Ukraine is forced to sue for peace. Now, if Russia continues its offensive and Ukraine can't replenish its losses, a desperate Kyiv might be compelled to seek peace to preserve its sovereignty. This obviously hinges on the fact that they lose all support from the West as well. In this scenario, Russia would hold the upper hand, imposing such demands as territorial concessions or constitutional changes that undermine Ukraine's independence. Now, this outcome would be deeply unfavorable to Ukraine, but could materialize if the balance of power tilts dramatically in Russia's favor. Now, scenario 4, Russia pursues total victory. If Russia senses that they have the momentum and there is weakness from the West, it might reject any peace deal entirely, aiming for complete domination. This outcome would depend on Russia's maximalist ambitions and could result in further devastation for Ukraine, but also could take Russia down its own path of devastation. And that brings me to scenario number 5. Russia faces economic collapse. In this scenario, which is the most ideal, Russia's prolonged war leads to an economic and social collapse similar to the Soviet Union's downfall after Afghanistan. Crippling sanctions, global isolation, and sustained military losses overwhelm Russia's economy, causing hyperinflation, resource depletion, and widespread domestic unrest. Protests and political fractures destabilize Putin's regime, while overextended Russian forces struggle with dwindling manpower, equipment, and morale. With its military and governance in disarray, Russia can no longer sustain its aggression and withdraws from Ukraine, leaving Ukraine to reclaim its territories back. Ukraine, bolstered by Western support, emerges as a resilient, independent state prepared to ally with the West, while Russia's collapse reshapes the global balance of power. Now, for peace to be achieved and sustained, 2 conditions must be met. Russia must stop, and it must be deterred from restarting the war. Achieving this requires shifting the balance of power, both on the battlefield and economically. The West, led by the US and Europe, could tighten sanctions on Russia, cut its access to war resources, and ramp up military support for Ukraine. However, Ukraine must also address systemic issues within its military, including mobilization, training, and command to stabilize its defense and protect its people. If Ukraine and its allies can shift the balance of power, Russia might be compelled to seek a way out of the war. While this may not immediately lead to Kyiv's ideal scenario, it could force Moscow to a more constrained position, paving the way for a stronger and more secure Ukraine in the long term.